There's been a lot of debate over the years about the longevity of physical media. Specifically, I'm referring to video games. Technology has advanced exceptionally fast over the years. It wasn't even that long ago when Blu-ray was introduced into the world, let alone DVDs. Physical media was how we would keep our favorite forms of media to share with our friends and family. And over the years, they've become more of a collectible or a set piece or display because of their rarity. Music CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray discs, compact game discs, floppy drives even, there's so much out there that contains so much information. Even the shelves in my office contain terabytes of data, all compressed into individual discs and cartridges. But what's happening to physical media? Well, some of you are hoping we move to a fully digital world, while some of you are trying to make sure that physical media stays the norm as long as it can. And some of you may have no idea what's happening in this space. Regardless of your thought process, sit with me for a minute. Let's discuss the death of physical media. Video games have been with us since the late 50s, but video games as we know them have been around since the 70s. At this point, that's just a little bit over 50 years. In the grand scheme of how long it took civilization to modernize, that's not that old. As advances in technology helped push video games forward, so too did it push how we experience these games. Up until the PlayStation 2 era, everything was pretty typical. The team would work as hard on it as they could, it gets printed and shipped, and the consumer goes to purchase it at a store. In 2005, Microsoft introduced the Xbox Live Marketplace with the release of the Xbox 360, a means to give consumers a different way to purchase games that didn't involve leaving their homes. All you would need is an internet connection and a hard drive to that console. Then players could log onto the store and purchase any game they wanted whenever they wanted. Sony then followed with the introduction of the PlayStation Store right before Nintendo did with the Wii Shop. Each of these storefronts, no matter what company you chose, provided the same exact thing: digital goods. It took a little bit to catch on, but it slowly started becoming the normal thing. There wasn't a big push for it until, well, kind of recently, actually. By recent, I mean around 2014 or so, and that's when the indie game scene really kicked off thanks to the mix of digital storefronts and content creators. This is one of the many amazing features of digital storefronts. It gives developers easier access to tools to release their games. Video game production can be expensive. Manufacturing the discs is cheap when you do them as a mass quantity, typically around $2.50 USD per disc. But that doesn't involve the cost to license the game on the consoles, pay the factory to manufacture the discs, pay the shipping of the stock, and finally the retail space in big box stores. Whereas with digital stores, there's a few fees to go through and bam, you're up and running on the store. The only other extra thing you need to pay for is a frontline ad. Other than that, you just spread the word. That's kind of a generalization of it all. I know there's way more to it than that, but it's easier than physically producing it. A lot of these developers don't have access to these manufacturing warehouses that license these games. But what are the significant differences between digital and physical besides convenience? There's a huge mentality nowadays of people who exclusively get their games digitally. A few reasons include saving space in their house, not wanting to risk the games breaking, thinking the games are cheaper digitally, etc. And to be fair, it's nothing new. We're all used to purchasing games digitally on our phones, but a more mainstream example would be PC games. Physical PC games would flood the stores up until the late 2000s or early 10s. All PC games, more or less, have gone exclusively digital. The games that do have a physical release are typically just a cardboard disc with a Steam code on the cardboard disc. There is one in every million PC release where there is a disc on the inside of the packaging, but a lot of the times it just has a Steam installer on it with a link to redeem the game on Steam. So it is just kind of a waste of a disc. So you may be asking to yourself, what's the problem? Sounds like there's good reason for people who want to go exclusively digital. Well, just like physical media, digital media has their fair share of cons. When purchasing a digital game, you're never truly owning the software. It's more of a license for you to use it as long as you're permitted to. Not really a rental, but more of like a lease, I suppose. Basically, the owners have the ability to disable you purchasing it or playing it after you purchase it, rendering the game useless. It's been proven way too many times over the years that this is not uncommon. The most famous example was PT. To be fair, that's a free demo. No one really purchased it, even though it's still impossible to experience again without hacking or piracy. Another example that I mentioned in a previous video was Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. This game has a very vocal and dedicated fan base. There's no denying that. I do actually really like this game. I think it's super fun and it's a great time with friends. But again, it was taken off of the store. So anyone who purchased it couldn't download it again. And if you didn't purchase it, well, too bad. You're out of luck. But the situation with this game specifically was fixed recently with, you guessed it, a physical release. Now anyone can play it anytime they want on their console, regardless if it gets taken down again or not. But why do these games get taken down though? There are a lot of reasons for this. The most common one that I've seen over the years is due to licensing. By that, I mean agreements with all the companies who took part in the game's production. Whether that just be lending the IPs or music or talent, all of it is under contract. And a lot of the time, those contracts have a time limit. A good chunk of them last way longer than you think. It was kind of recently that Alpha Protocol got delisted because the music license expired for that project. It's kind of funny how bargain bin movies that have so much licensed music in them can be sold for decades. But the moment a video game has one licensed song in it, it's such a complicated mess to sell it. Tangent aside. Anyways, a bigger example is when Activision had to remove every Marvel game they had ever worked on from every digital storefront because Marvel didn't renew their license. Even though Activision funded each project and everything, Marvel still has ownership of everything that used their characters. I remember a remaster of Ultimate Alliance was announced and put up in 2016. Then 2 years later, everything got pulled with no warning, including this remaster. On the flip side, there's weird legal trouble relisting these games just under Marvel because, like I said, Activision did fund and have their studios develop these games. So there's technically no right for Marvel to sell these games and remove Activision from the game entirely. All in all, these games are stuck in a legal purgatory. It wasn't just Marvel games. Every licensed game that Activision worked on got this treatment. I was lucky enough to purchase them way before they got delisted, which means I can download them and play them, but that's not permanent. At any point, they could choose to completely remove it from the Steam servers, retroactively removing them from my library. Or if however many years from now the servers go offline for good, then all of my digital purchases will be lost. That's what almost and definitely will happen to the PlayStation 3. A couple years ago, Sony announced that they were shutting it down, which means everyone would have lost their digital games. Not only that, but the servers would be offline. That means patches wouldn't be downloaded for games anymore, since you can't connect to the servers and download the patch. You'd be stuck with the vanilla version of these games on the disc. So if you had a game that was super buggy or had a patch that added the rest of the game, gone forever. You're stuck with whatever's on the disc. Now, in regard to those Marvel games, the fact that the digital listings were removed means the physical versions of those games are now worth a lot more. The publisher isn't allowed to produce and sell any more copies of those games, so whatever's out in the world is all that's left. So if a game didn't have that many copies printed for a specific console, then the value of that version specifically goes way up. They were already expensive before, but after the pandemic, everything skyrocketed. Things are slowly coming down now, but not by much. For these games specifically, it's leveled out and is slowly going back up, which is good for me since I already own them, but not good if I want to recommend them to others. Because like, some of these games are really good, but I know that no one wants to spend close to $100 on one Spider-Man game. And with the introduction of these digital specific consoles, it's more apparent now than ever that the industry is moving to embrace digital distribution. From what I've seen out in the wild, the upcoming generation definitely does favor digital over physical. Whatever saves the company's money is what they're gonna focus on. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but more and more games are becoming harder and harder to find after their initial print. I'm thinking that maybe after a game launches, the game gets 1 or 2 big waves of print, and then it gets sold digitally indefinitely. For me personally, I recently bought a PS5 for my friends for Christmas, and I had an extremely hard time finding a physical copy of Returnal. The game isn't that old, and it's already getting difficult to snag. Not only that, but after the Uncharted PS5 remaster came out, that thing left the shelves and sporadically returns. So what's gonna happen if we move to a digital ecosystem of video games? No physical media whatsoever. Exclusively downloads. Well, I hope you have plenty of hard drive space, because that's another issue. Digital games are the entire size of the game downloaded to the drive, whereas physical games have data on the disk itself to help mitigate the install size. Not only that, but hard drives fail, especially the ones in the PS4 and Xbox One. Those drives have a pretty high fail rate because of how outdated they are. Everyone's moved to SSDs, which are miles better, but that's not a permanent solution. One trace goes bad and boom, everything lost. So let's look at it this way. On one hand, you get a physical copy of a game that you love playing and you can play anytime you want, regardless of what happens to the hardware. But it's easy for them to get covered in cracks and are prone to disk rot, rendering the game completely useless. On the other hand, we can completely erase the risk of cracking a disk or having it fall apart by making it a digital copy. That way we can play it off the hard drive itself instead of using the disk. But what happens when the drive ultimately fails, in turn corrupting everything on it? Or when the game gets pulled and it can't be legally sold anymore? It seems both have their fair share of pros and cons. All that comes down to is personal preference. I personally think that physical media will be sticking around for a lot longer than we think. Hell, we all thought DVDs were going to be discontinued years ago, but we still see them for every movie release. I am of the crowd to keep physical media around as long as possible. It's important to have these printed and out into the world. No matter what happens to it online, I'll still have it. I can be a source to archive everything if needed. It's all here. But let me know what you think. Where are you leaning? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.